do have one courtesy of the floor. They are extended to former Senator Rick Horner, who is here with us. Sir, will you stand for the meeting? Bills now, conference report for adoption. House Bill 10, clerk will read.
House Bill 10 requires Sheriff's Park rate with ICE.
Senator Briggs is recognized.
Mr. President, members, I'm going to try to be as loud as Senator Overcat, because I think this is just as important an issue as what he stood up for earlier today. But I don't think we need to yell about this one because we've covered this bill a handful of times through this chamber. We all know the severity of what's going on our border. We know what type of sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and everything else is pouring into this country. We also know as state legislators, there's little we can do about it other than voting for the right person in November. What we can do about it is our sheriffs who are not complying with immigration. Our sheriffs who are releasing folks back into the community that are violent individuals charged with violent crimes that are here illegally. That is all this bill does. This bill does not round folks up who are not charged with crimes. This bill does not send law enforcement into homes of folks who are not charged with crimes. What this does is it says that an individual is locked up for certain enumerated violent crimes, violent felonies, and violent misdemeanors. That individual must be held by their sheriff for at least 48 hours prior to being released. That's all this bill does. I ask that you support this portion of House Bill 10. And I will hand it off to Senator Hines for the rest of this bill.
Senator Hines is recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. President. To explain the rest of this conference report for appropriations that's coming through, it first includes $248 recurring dollars to clear the wait list for opportunity scholarships, something we agreed to last year. This just fully funds that and adds 215 recurring scholarships for the 25-26 year. It also includes $24.7 million recurring dollars to clear the ESA Plus waiting list for children with disabilities. This funding would be retroactive to the beginning of the school year, and families would be eligible for tuition reimbursement on their schools. The legislation also provides $95 million recurring to fund the ADM contingency reserve for growing public school units. The 24-25 school year is the start of the new funding and arrears method designed to provide more budgetary certainties for LEAs and charter schools. And the reserve is an important part of this model that is used to provide funding for growing public schools. It also includes $64 million for the community college enrollment growth and $377 million for Medicaid to cover the rebase differences, $55.1 million for an infrastructure improvement developments in Chatham County, and $150 million for transportation improvements at the Randolph County mega site. Additionally, it also authorizes a new state program that expands broadband in areas of the state lacking access. It's important that we do this. This will make us eligible to receive about $1.5 billion of federal dollars for broadband access, and we need to move expeditiously on that process to be eligible for those federal funds. And finally, to support affordable housing projects across the state, it directs the transfer of about $59 million of the remaining emergency rental assistance funds to the Housing Trust Fund. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the appropriations of the conference.
Is there a discussion or debate? Senator Grassley, for purpose of rise.
To speak to the conference report.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to speak a bit about the Medicaid aspect of the conference report. The bill does contain some funds toward the Medicaid rebates. The Medicaid rebates requested by the Department of Health and Human Services to meet current fiscal year needs is not met by this bill. It actually underfunds the Medicaid rebates by $81 million It also underfunds the Medicaid Transformation Fund. This is, Medicaid Transformation is, I don't really fully understand it, I don't know that many of us really do, but it's a critical process that has to go well in order for people to be able to access services. And we know that when these kinds of mass-scale changes happen in our Medicaid system, there are serious consequences for beneficiaries when there's a break in the continuity of care. And that's what we see happen when we don't see processes properly supported and funded. So that's a concern I want to raise. So these are critical funds, right? The Medicaid funds that we're not adding back into the budget are funds that are meant to enable lower income working people for the most part to access Medicaid services and care, health care. Unlike funding for some of the most affluent families with subsidies for private schools that they can already afford, this funding is not simply a rebate to families for health care that they can afford. People who rely on Medicaid can't just dip into their savings. People who rely on Medicaid are not permitted actually to accrue more than $2,000 in savings, or else they become ineligible for Medicaid. $2,000 in today's money is not a lot. Quite literally, the $3,000 to $5,000 or so that voucher funds would be authorized for transmissions to subsidize wealthy families is more money than Medicaid beneficiaries ever see in their bank accounts at one time. So to be clear, there's no question that families should be able to choose private school. It's an option that exists alongside other choices like magnet and charter schools that are popular public options in Wake and other counties. The waiting list for public funding of private school vouchers is comprised of families who are in the higher income tiers and who have a right to access private schools. But we know that the vast majority of these families already have their children in private schools. And these dollars will simply go into the coffers of the private schools where they're already enrolled. And some of these private schools, we know from other states' experience, will simply raise their tuition in order to account for the additional funding. I have to point out that in Wake County, 10 of the schools that are being funded through these vouchers account for more than 25% of the new applicants. So there are 70 schools in Wake County accepting vouchers. 10 of those schools account for 25 of the new applicants. All 10 of those schools are owned by one person who has individually, by my first calculation, donated over $100,000 to legislative races this cycle alone. And that's just the money that shows up on individual campaign finance reports. So I have to mention a different waiting list because I think the priorities here are wrong. I have to mention a different waiting list that I think is more urgent, but doesn't have wealthy patrons investing in the process of eliminating it, and that's the innovations waiver. And if you've been here, welcome, Senator Brinson. Others of you have heard me talk about this before. The innovations waiting list is a list of over 18,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, some of whom have been waiting for services for more than a decade. These are services that help people with activities of daily living, including getting out of bed, getting ready for work, just getting out in the community. It includes people with IDD who need support in developing important life skills and getting and remaining connected to their local communities. And when these folks don't have services, their needs are being met by whatever patchwork of their families can put together. So these are quality of life issues for these families, and having these services available